And welcome back. We are now going to explore duplication, which is going to allow us to quickly and easily create much more complex things than we have done up to this point. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start here with my cube. And I want to take a minute to go ahead and make sure this is selected. And I want to be able to duplicate this. So up here in our object menu, we have the option to duplicate. And you can see we have two here. We have duplicate objects and duplicate linked. And we'll look at duplicate linked here in a little bit. But first we're going to use duplicate objects, which you notice the shortcut is Shift D. And we're going to kind of want to memorize that because it's going to be a lot faster than coming up here to this menu every time. But if I click duplicate objects, you'll see we very quickly get another cube that we can then go ahead and manipulate. And I can even, restrict this to different things. So like, for example, I do Shift Z. Now it's restricted to the X-axis and Y-axis here. So we can go ahead and just go ahead and place that as another cube. And if I wanted to duplicate that again, I can then do Shift D, and you can see we can very easily and very quickly get another cube. So it's a really quick way to create objects really quickly with the duplication command, rather than having to go through and create a new one every time. All right, now let's just say we want to actually start creating something. And let's clean this up here first a little bit. I'm just going to go ahead and while it's selected, hold down the Shift key. I should be able to select more than one object here. As you can see, we can select both these and then press the delete key and they'll go away. Now I'm just left with this singular object here. All right, pretty cool. I'm just going to go ahead, move him a little bit more close to center. And let's go ahead and just get this in a position where we can go ahead and manipulate this pretty freely. I'm just going to bring him up and I'm going to set my Z coordinate. Let's go ahead and place him at 0.1 just to get started here, and you can see where that places that in respect to everything. If I want to be a little bit higher, of course we can maneuver that. Just remember that this coordinate here corresponds to the center here, not the bottom of our shape. So that's an important thing to keep in mind here. And I'm just going to go ahead and I want to pretty much take this shape and maybe make it flat. And so I can go ahead and resize that so it's a pretty flat, almost like a tile, really, if you think about it like right now. It's almost like a tile, very small, very narrow. And if we zoom in just a little bit here, you can see it is a very narrow shape. And now we can go ahead and bring this much closer back down to the bottom here. So we can get that really close to the axis here. So now we could do like 0 and it'd be setting effectively on the ground. But of course, you remember it does have a width to it, so we want to make sure that we give that just a little bit of direction up. So maybe we do like 0.25. All right, so now it's floating up a little bit, but that's okay. That's a good starting point there. And we want to make sure that this is named. So we have right now is cube 001. So let's go ahead and give it a name. I'm just going to call it, let's just say tile for now. And we can change it later depending on if we want something more appropriate for whatever we choose to model. Now, as I mentioned before, we kind of roughly estimate this, but there is a way to get this so that we can see exactly where this is. And we can either press the numpad 3, or if we press this little X right here, this will allow us to see this exactly. So we can then, of course, zoom in a little bit here, and we can then manipulate this so that it ends up right on that axis. So it's a lot closer to things without us having to try and take a best guess from the other viewpoints. So this looks pretty good here. It's a nice good viewpoint of what we want to expect and see. All right, let's go ahead and change this to the top view because we were going to get ready to start building this into kind of more of a pattern here. I'm actually going to make this tile just a little bit narrower here. So let's just go back to our transformation here and let's actually just see if we can skinny this up just a little bit here. So it's more rectangular in shape. And, I might say, I want to move this a little bit so it kind of lines up with this so you can make sure it's got a nice good sizing here. So it's really kind of conforming and fitting within this bound here. And that's not too bad there. Just stretch that a little bit. And once we get that to a size that we like, I think that's a pretty good amount for us to start with. And you can see we have a nice good bound there. Now we can go ahead and duplicate this. So we're going to do Shift D to go ahead and duplicate. And so we can see we get another shape here. But I want to change this so where I can rotate this. And if I press R, you will see that it allows me to rotate it pretty quickly. And I can, of course, try to freely rotate this, but maybe I want to make this a set staggered amount. So if I were to go ahead and start typing, let's say 30 degrees, you can just literally start typing number 30. You'll see that it adds an angle to this. So it allows me to angle it. And if I add just quickly a negative sign in here, you'll see it makes it a negative 30. So that's a quick way to go ahead and just flip that. So pressing the negative key or the minus sign allows you to quickly change it between a positive and a negative angle. And now that this is angled, I can of course just click and it'll set that at the proper angle that I want. Because maybe I want to make like a spiral stair here. So let's go ahead and just get ready to move this. So I'm just going to go ahead and just slide them over just a little bit, just to kind of get it into a starting position. All right, now we want to make this so that, again, it's kind of a spiral stack here. So I'm just going to go ahead and move this over so that way it's on top of this at a nice little bit of an angle. And that looks pretty good there. But right now, these two shapes are kind of, if you want to think about, stacked on top of each other. So if I switch to the X view here and then do G and Z, you can see that I can then move this shape at a different layer here. So if I go ahead and drag him up, you can see how he gets up there. And then I can, of course, go ahead and position him in place. And then if I were to return to a different viewpoint, you can see that it is now, these two shapes are stacked atop each other, but at a much nicer viewpoint. All right, that is the very beginning of kind of our spiral feature here. And of course, we're also going to need to do more with this to kind of really bring it together. All right, and of course, we can very easily go ahead and just duplicate this again. So Shift D, as long as this is selected. And you can see we can, of course, add this in here very, very easily. And I can use my different viewpoints to make sure everything kind of gets to where I want it to be. And of course, this needs to be rotated again. So I just make sure I'm on rotate. Go ahead and type my negative 30 in here. And then of course, we should be able to rotate this to where we want to go. Negative 30. There we go. All right, and that gives us a nice good starting point there for everything. And now the one thing that we do kind of have to kind of keep in mind here as we move through this is that this, of course, is just doing one at a time. And you might say there's got to be a faster way, and you're right, there is. We can go ahead and instead of doing one individual, I can hold down the Shift key to select all these here, and then I could duplicate all of them. So if I use Shift D again, you can see I get the whole stair object moved at once. And we can, of course, move that to where we want. I accidentally clicked rotate there, so I'm just going to Control Z, back this up, Shift D again. Make sure these are all selected. And I can go ahead and set that in place. And then we can use our rotate option here to go ahead and rotate this appropriately. So for example, if we want this to be 30 degrees again, we can do that, but we want to make sure that we have all these shapes selected here and not merely just the one, because that's one downside of trying to key it in here. Is you notice if I come in here and type this in with, let's say, 30 degrees in the X, it will only manipulate that one shape. So it's just one thing to kind of keep in mind here as you kind of start working with these. All right, and let's go ahead and choose to rotate. And we might actually want our different view here. That would probably help. Start positioning those in place. And once we get this to where we want it, maybe we want to add a little bit more to this scene here. Maybe, for example, since this is almost like a stair now, maybe I want to instead come in here and do things such as, add a pole in here. So there's a whole bunch of different things that we can do with our scene now. And again, it's simply just because we have this ability to manipulate these pretty freely here. Let's go to our X, check that out. Okay, looks like we had a little bit of movement there in our top plane, so I'll have to adjust this one. Probably just happened when we were playing around with it. Okay, it's easy enough to fix. And we can just bring him right back down to sit with the rest of them. And if we go back to our Z view, looks like we have a little bit of movement here. I just need to slide this over and up in place. There we go. And again, we have this kind of center here. I'm just going to go ahead and add in a new mesh. Let's do a cylinder this time. And I'm going to slide this cylinder kind of over to here. So it acts as the center. And I might say, I don't want this to be quite so large. Let's just go to our transformation tool here. Bring this down in scale. And if we go ahead and take this out a little bit, you can see how this is actually coming into play. So that's a pretty cool little staircase that we made there, a little spiral stair there with our tile. Now, one thing you do probably want to do as you start working through this is to go ahead and add in all these different pieces here. So these are right now just tile 1, tile 2, tile 3, tile 4. So you may want to go ahead and name them much more appropriately because it's going to be a lot easier to look for them. Alright, so this should give us a nice, good fundamental grasp of how to use duplication. And while our shape might be pretty simple here, we can apply this to create much more complex shapes, as we're going to see when we look at the activity for today. So, hopefully this gives you a nice, good fundamental with how to use duplication to really help speed up your workflow.